How does a quarterback battle in Los Angeles affect you drafting Rams? Which AFC West receiver needs adjustment on your 2021 cheat sheets? And is there a shakeup among the elite tight end tier this season? Plus, the 2020 FFPC Pros vs. Joe's champs Biplab, Mandal, and Hudson, Kern, Reeve join us to talk about taking down the field last season, how their strategy will get switched up for 2021, and much more. We've got a great show for you. Farrell Elliott is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now listening to the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com, with your hosts Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here's Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott.
Thanks so much, Rob. Quiet Hollers as well. Remember to check out all of their music at quiethollers.com. Greetings and salutations to all of you Balkaholics and Farelliacs. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com. I'm your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. My co-host is the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, Farrell Elliott. Farrell, welcome in. It is not the show I hope to be doing. I hope to be talking a little Packers Super Bowl. That will not happen. Maybe next year. I sound like a Cubs fan, which is ridiculous because I am not, but there is always that next year. But we do have a great Super Bowl to talk a little bit about tonight. And we got a lot of great fantasy football stuff that, you know, even we're in sort of like the quote-unquote dead season. We do have a lot of news around the league that's affecting drafts right now in the FFPC.
Oh, buddy, you know, dead season, that left me kind of cold, Balky, because I don't think there is any such thing. You know, there's so much news going on, and if you couldn't find, if you like your news to come right from the football field, all you had to do was spend some time on NFL Network this week and see what's happening in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, where despite COVID, we're still having a Senior Bowl, and there were players down there that stood out. And Balky, you know, still waters run deep, buddy. I'm sorry about Green Bay. You hadn't talked about it all week, and I'm surprised you brought it up. But, you know, yeah, next year's next, and we'll see what happens.
Took me a little bit. I think by like Wednesday, maybe yesterday, I was over the loss, but I did take this one harder a little bit more than I had in previous years. It is what it is. Moving on. Speaking of which, talking about the Senior Bowl, one Division III player was there this week in Mobile, and he is Quinn Miners. I believe I'm pronouncing the name right. The offensive lineman from the University of Wisconsin Whitewater. How about that? Anybody else stand out to you at the Senior Bowl this week, Farrell?
There are, and by benefit of attendance, that young man stands out. And that's what's great about the small college players is they get in there and they get an opportunity to be noticed. That's the first guy you look at because I'll give you three guys, not Division III, but still small college. Cade Johnson from South Dakota State. My buddy Fenton, his kid was on a swimming scholarship at South Dakota, and so he watches all that conference. Told me about this player 3 years ago. Cade Johnson be a very interesting NFL slot receiver. If he goes to a team that needs one, there's a player that you can look at earlier than you might think for a rookie wide receiver that you don't maybe have never heard of. Demetric Felton, I saw this player when I scouted Josh Kelly last year, and I liked him. He kind of reminds me of Lynn Bowden Jr., perhaps not the physicality, but a multiple position player, will play wide receiver in the NFL. And then the player out of North Carolina who we watched here in the ACC conference tear up the University of Louisville, Mike Carter. Very good running back, very explosive player. So I would give you those three, and I would say that's a good start on the 2021 Senior Bowl.
We are going to get into so much more dynasty talk over the next 3 or 4 months on this program for sure, but whetting the appetites of all of our dynasty listeners, including a couple of dynasty players who may or may not be on the show tonight, it is going to be a veritable cornucopia of dynasty action beginning tonight. Coming up on tonight's show, we're going to find out where the value lies in the Rams backfield in drafts right now. We're going to discuss how much of an investment you should make into Austin Eckler in 2021. And the dynamic duo of Biplab Mandal and Hudson Kern Reeve will drop in to talk about how they took down 42 pros and 41 Joes to secure the bag in the 2020 FFPC Pros versus Joes competition, as well as how they plan on doing the same with their free entry into the 2021 FFPC main event where they can win $500,000. That will be definitely exciting. Shout out to the chat room right now. You can post any questions you might have in there if you want to connect with us on Twitter. The show is at HSFFR. I am at Eric Balkman. Biplab is on Twitter at _ Rainmaker. And you can always check out the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship that Farrell runs at KFFSC.com. And as a reminder, not only do I play in it, but Biplab and Kern both play in it as well. You can jump into that in 2021 and compete against all three of us. You can post on our Facebook page at facebook.com/HSFFhour and 347-426-3682, 347 GAME-OVER. You can also email the show at the inbox, highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. If you do have any questions for us, send them in. We do have a celebrity question for our listeners, or for our guests on the show tonight, too. Can't wait to get to that, as well as the rest of the questions, tweets, and emails in our fantasy feedback segment later on in the show. Thanks to our audio engineer, my best friend Bryce, and our producer and mutual friend Rob. Let's get the party started. Best ball drafts open at myffpc.com. Go to myffpc.com/dynasty for sale and pick up a good discount on a dynasty orphan that's needing a new home for 2021. And then I know I misspoke last week. I said Lance Turbis was going to be on the High Stakes Lowdown this week. He will be on the premiere of Season 6 of the High Stakes Lowdown coming up next week. Season 7, actually. I think it's Season 7, actually, for the High Stakes Lowdown. That is coming up next week, rotoviz.com/podcast. Thanks to Football Guys, Draft Sharks, RotoWorld, and Rob for tonight's rundown. Farrell, I don't know if you, or for tonight's Fantasy Flash, Farrell, I don't know how much you delved into this, but I was reviewing the Fantasy Flash and the whole show rundown. There is a lot of Los Angeles football stuff on here tonight. A lot of Rams talk, a lot of Chargers talk. We'll kick things off in the middle of the country with the Cincinnati Bengals report in The Athletic today stating that Bengals head coach Zach Taylor saying, quote, everything seems on pace in Joe Burrow's recovery from his ACL surgery. The full quote from Taylor. He's been around quite a bit. He does everything he can possibly do right now. He's adamant about that. I'm very careful to make predictions, but everything has been positive so far. Burrow is hoping to start throwing the football again next month if he can avoid setbacks doing that. There is a chance that he can be ready for week 1. Farrell, as you look at this Bengals offense next year, the emergence of T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd's still going to be there. Could have a rookie receiver in the mix as well. They'll get C.J. Uzoma coming off that torn ACL. And then obviously Joe Mixon, Travion Williams. There's some pieces there. You'd like to think that they help the offensive line in the draft. How concerned are you about Joe Burrow being ready for week 1? And how concerned are you in general about this Bengals offense if he is not ready to go?
He's not ready to go. It's a real problem. He's on pace. So what pace does that mean? Who has this kind of injury happened to before? Oddly enough, I guess 10 or 12 years ago, Carson Palmer, you might say, that and he returned to start on time. And then we're all familiar with Carson Wentz. And Carson Wentz, as I recall, missed a couple, maybe as much as 3 games. I know it was at least 2. When he came back from this injury. Teddy Bridgewater's injury was probably much more involved in this, and it's that's why I root for Teddy today, because he had 15 months of rehab. I guess, Balky, as a player moves into this, rehab and how hard you work is very important, and I don't think there's a question here about this player's dedication to football. The mental aspect then becomes part of it, how you're going to hold up when you play again. This kid's tough, and from the cloth he's cut from, I don't think that will be a problem. So I'm, anyone who wasn't all in on being all for Joe Burrow, if he comes back and plays, and he'll play better because he'll have a year under his belt, but if he comes back and plays with abandon and brings this team together like I know and think he will, then, I think everyone will be a pretty big Joe Burrow fan. So, yeah, I think we're going to be all good.
I hope you're right, because I'm definitely bullish on Higgins, especially next year too. The way that he played this past season, I'm very excited about him, and obviously, I'm rooting for Joe Burrow as well. Just from a football standpoint, the guy was awesome when he was healthy last year. Hopefully they continue this, and hopefully they can continue. He can continue his trajectory up the echelon in the NFL, becoming one of the better quarterbacks there. All right, shifting to a lesser determined quarterback situation, we could say, out in Los Angeles. Jordan Rodriguez from The Athletic says the Rams, quote, happiness with John Wolford is not fleeting. Rodriguez considers internal competition from Wolford the most likely scenario to battle Jared Goff in the offseason and in training camp. Sean McVay, according to Rodriguez, says he likes Wolford's, quote, processing speed and the way he can extend plays with his legs. Also, his ability to move to reset his launch point, which helps in longer developing plays. Now, Jared Goff didn't really have a great deep threat in 2020. Jared Goff is not a very mobile quarterback. Jared Goff is a very, the definition of a not game manager.
Statue.
Like, he's a statue, and he's sort of he's a what's the term I'm looking for? What they said about, he's a system quarterback. That's what I was trying to think of. Mm-hmm. Because he does what he's asked up to his talent level and not anything else. Because of Goff's contract, because of the cap situation the Rams are in, it's going to be very difficult for them to bring anybody else in. Farrell, I would imagine that Goff wins this quarterback competition, but I mean, the fact that they're not putting this much, they're not putting much confidence behind their starting quarterback, as I'm referring to McVay here, does that give you pause on drafting guys like Robert Woods, drafting guys like Cooper Kupp, where you did last year? Maybe, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, but Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, does that make you a little bit skittish about drafting any of these Rams position players, or do you still feel comfy knowing what Goff was able to do with them over the course of the 2020 season?
Hey, our beloved friend Bobby Sangerman always says, I turn off all the noise. So this is noise that needs to be turned off. Mr. Rodriguez, he's stirring up a little bit of stuff. Pre-Super Bowl week about the quarterback position. Listen, Wolford is 6'0", not particularly physical. And I see this all over football. I've seen it for years. The most popular player on a team is always the backup quarterback. Everybody loves him. The defensive side of the ball loves him. But sometimes the coaches can fall a little bit into that. And I really don't I think this commentary of things you like about a quarterback, there's things to like about Jared Goff too. And something about his talent level, I'm not ready to give up on him, because all the same guys that are there running this business are the guys who drafted Jared Goff and paid Jared Goff. So they have a responsibility in this too to move forward with him. What is that about launch point? Yeah, I think we will see most of I agree with you. Goff will be the starting quarterback here. Goff should be better and more consistent next year. And if he isn't, his exit time will be predetermined from the Rams, but it won't be to give a lasting job to John Wolford, at least if everybody's thinking straight. But now, in football, not everybody's thinking straight.
You got that right, my friend. No question about that. Yeah, Wolford, an undrafted free agent in 2018. We might be looking back on this in a few months. I think we're both fairly confident, especially Farrell, that this will be a non-story. But we have more Rams to talk about here as the Seahawks have hired passing game coordinator formerly of the Rams, Shane Waldron, to be their offensive coordinator. Adam Schefter actually tweeted this out this week. Here's what's interesting about this. I never heard of Shane Waldron before. He's worked under Bill Belichick. He's worked under Sean McVay, and he was the Rams passing game coordinator for the last 3 seasons after he was their tight ends coach there. It was a pretty successful passing offense, despite Jared Goff there. I don't know how much of an impact he had because this is Sean McVay's offense. But here's what's interesting to me, Farrell. So Pete Carroll says after the season is over, he wants to really pound the ball. He wants to be able to run the ball more. And Scott Linehan was the offensive coordinator, or not Scott Linehan, Schottenheimer Ron Schottenheimer was the offensive coordinator there. And, this is a guy that loved running the football. But I think there was, at least to me, it seemed like there was a fundamental disagreement on how to run this offense. So to me, even Schottenheimer wanted to pass the ball more, given Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Now you go out and get a passing game coordinator from the Rams. To me, this, I don't know, this, I would have thought they'd get more of like a run, ground and pound base type coordinator, and it seems like they're going the opposite way. Can you help me make sense of this? Because I'm not really sure what to make of it right now.
You might be overthinking it. Whether you throw the ball 20 or 40 times a game, you're going to have a passing game. And it's a guy that knows what to deal with opportunities. It's just like we play in fantasy football. We want our guys to get opportunities. Well, the run game sets up the pass. Maybe Mr. Waldron, he's a graduate of Tufts. I love looking at these resumes of coaches. I've always wondered, because I have some people out there associated with this team. I want to know where this guy comes from. This guy goes to Tufts, and he goes to a school there with the tuition now. I don't know what it was when he went. Tuition now is about $50,000 a year. He walks onto the football team and becomes the long snapper. Yeah, this is a real education you're getting in this place. When he gets out of college, he can't get a job, and this is when I first met him. He worked for the Hartford Colonials of the UFL or some variant thereof. This guy is a football junkie, and he's worked his way up from the bottom, and he knows what to, he knows how to make the opportunities work that he's given. And look, he's going to be working with one of the finest quarterbacks that plays in the league. And he's going to be working with the receiver that everyone in fantasy football is dying to draft. So it doesn't matter how much opportunities or what the head coach wants to do. This guy can take whatever he's given and make something work. It's a big, big opportunity for him. He's interviewed for a couple of jobs, and I'm surprised he hasn't got them, because he's more than ready. He's authentic, and he's genuine, and the players love him. And that's going to be very important, because I saw something I didn't very much like in that All-Star game. And that was the star wide receiver yelling for the ball in Seattle, yelling on the sidelines. Everybody could hear it. Next thing was next. Russell Wilson goes out and tries to feed him the ball, and the corner jumps the pass, and it was a pick six. And so, there's some things on that sidelines that need to be worked out. This is the kind of guy that can make Seattle work, and he's the kind of guy that the head coach would love being around.
There you go. Okay, well, you've definitely I would hire Shane Waldron based on this recommendation from you, Farrell. This is all good things.
Look, I couldn't have made it at Tufts College. I mean, you've got girls up there in thick woolen sweaters. I mean, nobody's want to buy anything I'm selling up there. They play teams like Wesleyan and Bates and Colby College. Hudson, Kern, Reeve can tell you all about it. But this guy's paid his dues, and I think this is his home. I think he's from up in the Pacific Northwest, and this has got to be. He's coming home to greatness. And how old's the head coach?
Oh, God, he's got to be 69, something like that.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years from now, everybody might know who Shane Waldron is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The whole show.
Yeah, Pete Carroll is 69. He turned 70 years old this year. By the way, you mentioned Wesleyan going up against Tufts. Not only did Waldron go to Tufts, Bill Belichick, graduate of Wesleyan University, too, who Waldron worked under for a little bit. Amazing how that works out.
All those East Coast guys are hanging together.
I'm going to bring on our guests right now. Not that we need to keep talking about the Rams, although we could. We have a couple of them tonight, and I want to welcome back, first of all, an FFPC Best Ball Dynasty Football Guys main event champ, including the 8th place finisher in this year's FFPC main event, Biplab Mandal, back onto these airwaves. Also, the other guest joining him tonight, making his long-awaited show debut. He has a ton of titles in the main event, Football Guys Players Championship, the FFPC Best Ball League, and he teamed up with Mandal to win the 2020 FFPC Pros vs. Joes competition this year. My pleasure to finally bring on maybe the only member of the Harvard Society of Fellows who is a high school dropout and who has penned more than 150 papers on the marriage between game theory and evolutionary biology, which he says has a lot in common with fantasy football, theoretically speaking, of course. He's currently a Cornell department chair in evolutionary biology who craves his raw Abilene, Texas roots as a passionate Cowboys fan. Thank you for doing the show this week, Hudson, Kern, Reeve, and welcome back, Biplab Mandal. Gentlemen, how are you?
How are you guys? Thank you for having us.
Oh, this
we're
is good.
We're the
this
perfect guests for the dead season in fantasy football.
This is The Walking Dead, Biplab and Hudson, Kern, Reeve. It's just wonderful. Hi, guys.
It's a pleasure to be here at long last.
Yes, at long last, indeed. Yeah, Kern, I've been trying to get Hudson on for, I don't know, years and years and years. And he's like, well, Balky, I'll come on. Just let me win something of note first. And he's had all these great finishes. He's won all this money. But finally, you and Biplab team up to win the 2020 Pros vs. Joes, and I get you on. And we're coming up on our 500th episode ever, too. So I'm glad I somehow snuck you in the first 500 episodes of this podcast, which is great. We're going to talk much more fantasy football here. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, I want you guys to tell the listeners what you do for a living. Kern, I actually kind of spoiled the reveal there with you working at Cornell as a department chair. And I know Biplab, you've told us before, but Biplab, go ahead, and then Kern, if there's any other details that you want to share with us about how you're spending your days, that'd be great as well.
Will do.
Yep.
Bip, you're
so
first.
I'll leave it for Kern's moment. I'll keep it short. I'm an executive vice president in an IT consulting organization, and I run a global delivery services team.
Well, I, Kern, am a professor in the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior, as was mentioned. Let me tell you a little bit about what I study. I study animal decision-making, especially decisions that animals make in social groups, including wasps, social wasps. No, not the murder hornets, but the wasps that probably nest on the eaves of your houses. And also I've studied naked mole rats, which was for my PhD. And right now I'm studying social decision-making in clones of bacterial cells. So it's all over the map, but the common theme is I'm interested in the evolution of cooperation and conflict in animals.
Balky, that is how I lured HKR to play in Kentucky. I said, man, if we got a room full of animals for you, you got to come down here. And it was great. But I'm going to hope my first question is to Biplab. Before I get started, near and dear to my heart is my associate, Jesse Bumstead. And Jesse is a self-educated guy, did not go to college. He has a close relationship with Biplab. He often communicates with HKR. He's getting his college education by just through fantasy football, dealing with these two gentlemen. And it's a pleasure. And for my test, I'm going to quickly ask my questions and shut up, because in this kind of company that we're keeping tonight, Balky, people may think I'm smart too just for hanging out, So here we go. Biplab, the Pros versus Joes competition, congratulations to you both. The FFPC, in their wisdom, introduced this 18-round slim format in DraftMaster style drafting. best ball drafted. So how did you modify your strategy, knowing that you were coming in with the slim, and what was the biggest difference about it? And are you certain that I suppose based on your true success, that you will prefer that format as we move forward?
Great question, Farrell. If you look at the two formats, right, typically in the 28-round standard best ball, someone like me prefers carrying 3 defenses and 3 kickers and maybe one more sprinkled in, right? So that's 6 to 7 positions gone, right, if you do the math, right? So from that standpoint, it's really not a big transition, but the good news is, you don't need to deal with the headaches of defenses and kickers, which could ruin your season, they are so deviant, week to week. But, in the 28 format, I also like to carry 3 quarterbacks, and that was a discussion point here. Do we go with 3 quarterbacks, or do we take 2 promising upside quarterbacks and not go for the third, right? And then we wanted to go with 3 tight ends, right? So once you decide the number of quarterbacks and tight ends in this format, then it's all about filling up your running backs and wide receivers, right? So we wanted to go 3 tight ends, grab a tight end early, right? That was the plan. And then in the draft, we were probably going to take Henry, Sanders, or Kelsey, although I did tell Kern that we were not going to get Sanders because Nelson Sousa was drafting before us, and he's not going to pass Sanders. And I've been studying him for years. He's a great player, and we learn a lot from him, right? So it came down to Derrick Henry or Kelsey, and thankfully Kelsey was there, so we grabbed him at that spot. And then decided, we would front load running backs because of the best ball format and fill up other positions later.
Kern, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you saw in the previous best ball slim drafts in the Pros vs. Joes format. But before I do, Biplab, I do want to ask you one follow-up to that. When you and Kern were talking about, okay, how many quarterbacks do we want, how many tight ends do we want, was that at all fungible based on how the draft was falling to you? Did you guys have a set number in mind that you were going to stick to prior to the draft? Or did you discuss like, okay, well, maybe we'll make up our minds to see how the draft goes first to see whether we're going to roster 2 quarterbacks, whether we're going to roster 3 quarterbacks, the number of our tight ends. How did that shape up as the draft moved on?
So it's always a balance, right? Like, for example, we had the tentative idea of what we wanted to do. We had the tentative idea of targeting certain offenses and staying away from certain others. And then there were some players which we will talk about, like Antonio Gibson. No matter what, we wanted to draft him, right? So that was part of the strategy. And then obviously, Hudson, being the genius he is, I had asked him to figure out, okay, which are the high upside receivers or players, who on week-to-week basis might have big games and crests and falls, and then let's target some of those types of players. So what we don't want is consistent floors, but high ceiling players, right? So some of that thought process was there, but, in these formats, you always have to be flexible, right, and adjust according to what the other players are doing.
Kern, let me talk to you about because this was, you guys drafted on the 5th night. Now, there were 7 Pros vs. Joes drafts this past year. There was a slow draft, and then obviously the 6 live ones that you heard on this show. You guys were on night 5. How closely were you following the first 4 nights, and did you guys change up any strategy based on what you had seen players doing in the first ever Best Ball Slim edition of Pros vs. Joes?
Yeah, I followed several of the initial Pros vs. Joes, probably 3 out of the 4, and it helped to form some general principles. Like Bip was saying, we dynamically followed, the course of the picks and would discuss each pick. Oh, somebody did this, we didn't expect this, let's adapt. But we still had some general principles that we went into the draft with. that were based on what I had seen from the other pros versus Joes. Our first general principle, the main one, is zig when everybody else is zags, because you want to set your team apart from the rest of the crowd so that you have a chance of ascending to the very top. So one of them is that we wanted to take high upside players. We weighted players by their ceilings, probably more than we would in just a normal classic league, for example, with just 12 competitors, because we felt like we wanted to compete against the entire group. Plus, we were up against some of the industry greats as well. Also, we didn't, unlike what was happening in the other pros versus Joes, we didn't want to put as much weight on rookies, even the ones that we knew were going to be talented, like Jonathan Taylor and Cam Akers, because we figured it would take a while for them to be worked into the offenses, and by that time we might fall too far behind in the point standings. We did take Jerry Jeudy, but we didn't go overboard on some of the rookies like many of the other players, even the pros did. And finally, and this went against my grain, because I had, and the football guys had been prone to go after the Mahomes and the Lamar Jacksons relatively early. We wanted to wait on our quarterback, and we were extremely happy to end up with Josh Allen in round 8. I think that was one of the keys to the success of our team. And then we drafted Burrow 3 picks after that as our backup. We didn't take any more quarterbacks. We invested in some late round players that we thought might pan out. And the one that really came through for us, and I got to give Bip the majority of the credit for this, was Corey Davis on the last pick.
Yeah,
he really produced for us. We thought about it. A rookie, maybe an upside, like a really obscure Duvernay, for example, for the Ravens. But Corey Davis, I think, was a real differentiator for our team.
Bip,
That's
why
excellent,
were you on
Corey
Davis so much?
Oh.
Just curiously.
Sorry, what did you say?
No, Bip. That last
Yeah.
round where you guys were deciding, between a rookie or whoever and whatnot. Why did you convince Kern that Corey Davis is the right way to go there? Because you were clearly right.
So one of the thought process there, Balki, because the last picks, when you get to that, right, it's all about upside and I would say calculated risk versus foolish risk, right? And Corey Davis, the thing is, with wide receivers and tight ends, they take 4 or 5 years to develop. Devontae Parker burnt me for 5 years. I dropped him in Dynasty, and then he breaks out, right? So,
Yep.
so
you and me
one
both,
of the
man.
thought process was, here's a 5th round, here's a 5th overall pick on a team where I was not completely sold out on A.J. Brown. Now he did great, and then Tannehill was starting to do something good there. Why not take a chance on a talent like Corey Davis versus a Miles Boykin or Russell Gage or even a Duvernay, right? So that was the thought process. Nobody knew he would be this good, but that's how we ended up with him.
Well, guys, I knew Corey Davis would be good there, and even I knew it. So you guys are not impressing me that much with that Corey Davis. Although how sweet he was to have in this format, because you didn't have to make any decision on starting him. But what you guys do impress me with is you get better every year. You've proved it here. You prove it in the FFPC every year, and have for many years. And now you've won this big tournament. So Balky says by winning this, you're going to get a complimentary, credited FFPC team, and that's the best kind to have. So, HKR, I'm coming in with you, and I want to get a follow-up here based on how you answer this. But you guys got Allen. A lot of the other guys that we've had on the show since I've joined Balky, it had great success because they waited on Diggs. One of the players that was still available later than he should have been this year, was Keenan Allen, and he's still flirting with big numbers, although he didn't return to his 2017. He gets a new offensive coordinator this year, which may push him over 1,000 yards and beyond. So I want to know what you guys are going to do in the future and where you're going. I want to talk about Keenan Allen because I thought it was crazy that he was available in the 6th round. Where is he going to be available when we get to Las Vegas, when we get to Louisville? in 2021?
Great question. So, yes, just to confirm, we were very excited to land him at that point. We had him rated highly, and we kept wondering how far he was going to drop. So we snapped him up as soon as we could after we had solidified our running backs with David Montgomery, which also was a useful pick for us. But what's Allen going to do? Well, so Bip and I are going to have a main event team, and if you're asking us how we might be rating Allen right now, I think Joe Lombardi's, making the transition from quarterback coach for the Saints to offensive coordinator is going to pay off big for Allen. I looked back at some Lombardi's previous accomplishments in the passing game, and I don't think a lot of people know that in 2014 and 15 he actually had Calvin Johnson and Golden Tate both be 1,000-yard receivers. And of course, he's known as a quarterback whisperer. I think he's going to be great for the passing game by tutoring Herbert, and that means Keenan Allen is probably going to be the wide receiver one and is going to reap the dividends of it. I would be willing to consider drafting him mid-second to early third round, not certainly waiting till the 603 or the place where he normally went in the FFPC last year. So I'm very high on
I think if you're going to get him, that's where you would have to go and get him. We spoke a little earlier about Shane Waldron, a name you're not familiar with. Lombardi is a name where you get saddled with the name that's on the Super Bowl trophy, and your grandfather is this Vince Lombardi, and you wonder when you go in for a job interview, how does that work? What do you have to prove when you go? I wonder if that's a blessing or a curse. His blessing has been delivered to go to this team with this quarterback and Keenan Allen, which you think will go up, and I think that's where you'll have to draft him. So quickly, I want to go a little off script and ask you about the other side. What about the receiver Williams, who everybody just dies to draft? Can you see some consistency and some development for Williams as you go forward?
Yeah, I think both of them. I think both of them are going to develop. I would take, of course, Allen over Williams, but I think Williams is going to greatly outperform what he did last year. I think he was a bit of a disappointment to a lot of people last year. I think he's going to be a potential sleeper this year and rise up the ranks too. And I'm actually excited about Eckler for the same reason. I think I think he has a lot of potential in this offense. If you think about where Lombardi was coming from with the Saints and so on. So I see a role for him, for all three of them. That's going to propel them up the draft board.
By the way, as long as we're talking about Joe Lombardi, 62 years ago to the day, fellas, Vince Lombardi was hired as the coach and general manager of the Green Bay Packers. So we're celebrating that anniversary in Northeast Wisconsin today. Keenan Allen, by the way, in FFPC best ball drafts currently. And remember, and you guys talked about it too, his value was obviously depressed last year, and everybody thought Tyrod Taylor was going to be tossing him the rock, not the new wunderkind, Justin Herbert. Keenan Allen, and we get this data from FantasyMojo.com, Darren Armani, who puts this all together. Wide receiver 10, guys, at the 308 is his average spot right now. Right after guys like Calvin Ridley, A.J. Brown, right before guys like Allen Robinson and Chris Godwin. That is where Allen's value is lying in drafts right now. We'll get into much more Keenan Allen stuff as the season goes on. We're talking to the 2020 FFPC Pros versus Joe's champions, Biplab, Mandal, and Kern, Reeve. I feel like I asked this question. I know, Biplab, this is not the first time that you have competed in this competition before, but the biggest adjustment that you make or that you think you have to make when you're normally used to going up against 11 FFPC Joes in every draft, and now you switch where you're going against 5 Joes, but 6 pros that may or may not be as familiar with the format. How much do you switch up your strategy in this?
Well, can I talk some smack here?
Yes, please.
To be honest, I love these drafts where half of it are pros and half of it are Joes, because To be honest, I have found drafting against Joes more difficult than pros, And in pros versus Joes, all the Joes are main event players where they are doling out $1,800 for a team, and so they know their stuff, right? Now, pros are great, great analysts, good information about technicalities of the game, and a lot of brilliant stuff, but they do not have what we say, the drafting experience, right? Not all of them might be drafting hundreds of teams a month, right? So that's where I feel sometimes Joes get an edge over pros. Now, that being said, in this draft, it was difficult because you had people like Nelson Souza, the king of best ball drafting, Matt Sharp. I just see him crushing best balls everywhere. And then you had an analyst like Graham Barfield, and we were sandwiched between Souza and Barfield, right? So it was a tough draft, but I think what happened was we got the value we wanted. For example, from a fantasy standpoint, dynasty players like us, we were very much into Antonio Gibson very early in the season, and we're very happy at the ADP we got him. If this was a draft with more Joes and some of the players we play against, he would have probably gone in 4th or 5th round. So those were some advantages I thought we got. And I love drafting with pros. That's why, any day I'll take them over Joe.
Yeah. Hey, Vip, I think you're really onto something. I think you're really onto something there. And I've often thought that is that the FFPC players are the finest players in the world, and when you bring in guys that do this for a living, they really got somebody to compete against these players. We've been sticking out on the West Coast. We're talking about these coaching changes. Let's talk a little bit about the Seattle Seahawks, because I could not get a feel for which team was going to show up. And if you look back at the season, you really got a team for the first 8 weeks that played one way, and then for the second 8 weeks that played another. And Metcalf is a terrific player. I'd like to know how high you think he is going in the draft this year. But how do you expect various Seahawks players to recover from the disappointing end of this season? And will there be a hangover effect? And are you hesitant to draft Seahawks players, or possibly could some of these guys become your bargain players due to a type of recency bias on what we saw over the last few weeks?
Yep. No, and Farrell, I must give you a shout out. The best education I've gotten on Shane Waldron so far was the first 5 minutes of this podcast, right? So whatever I say is probably going to be speculative and what I'm speculating, but then we are 6 months away from football and lot will evolve. The interesting thing, though, what I was reading some time back is Russell Wilson was very vocal about sticking his nose into the offensive coordinator hire, right? And I'm assuming he had some say in this hire. Now, where Waldron comes from, from a Sean McVay offense, I'm wondering if he incorporates more play actions, more scramblings, more bootlegs, rollouts, and I'm wondering if he leverages Wilson's strength of being a mobile quarterback, right? And if he can do that, I think the passing game and more of a high-flying offense will happen here, because Wilson is a big upgrade over Jared Goff, and he can best deep ball thrower, right now. And interestingly, where Waldron comes from, I think the tight end game might also elevate at Seahawks, which have been none to non-existent. And there is a sleeper guy for dynasties I like, on that team, Colby Parkinson. I picked him up from waivers in some of my dynasties. I feel that kid will develop over a period of time. And if you look at where Waldron comes from, Rams have had Higbee and Everett delivering for a long period of time. So I actually feel the offensive players will be fine. I think if they fall, I will still draft them. I am not a Penny or a Chris Carson guy. So, for me, Metcalf, Lockett, Wilson, I'm just going to draft them the way I would draft even if Schottenheimer was there.
DK Metcalf going in FFPC best balls right now as wide receiver 5, fellas. That's wide receiver 5 at the 208. Tyler Lockett not going until wide receiver 24. That's at the 512 for the receivers. Russell Wilson currently being drafted as QB 8 at the end of the 6th round. So technically you could get all 3 of them on your team if you did want the Seattle Seahawks stack in 2021. We're talking with the Pros versus Joes champs from last year, Biplab, Mandal, and Kern, Reeve. Kern, just shifting to the other coast here briefly for a second, there's going to be a lot of young talent on the Philadelphia Eagles in 2021. There's also going to be a lot of turnover, a lot of guys that were there last year that either won't be on the team or they're going to have very, very relegated roles as to what they've been enjoying over the course of their career there. Nick Sirianni is now the new head coach. What do you think about guys like Miles Sanders and Jalen Reagor, who clearly, are foundation pieces of this offense, and that's who you typically want to draft? How nervous would you be about investing in those guys in the first year under head coach Sirianni and then Shane Steichen as the offensive coordinator?
I think I've done a little bit of research on their philosophies, and I think they're going to actually implement philosophies that are going to be conducive to improvement by both, especially Sanders. So it appears that they're going to be emphasizing the run game more. In particular, they're going to be instituting play action passes more often. Unfortunately, I think that there was an imbalance in the offense originally with the Eagles. They passed something like 2/3 of the time, as opposed to the Chargers, where Sirianni and Steichen came from, which is closer to 50-50. I think it was 58.7, something like that percent when I calculated the figures. So that means it's going to be a more balanced offense, and it's going to be based on play-action passes that increase the degree of unpredictability. And I like that for both the run game and the pass receivers. Obviously, it means more touches for Sanders, but it also may mean more openings, more yards after catch for Reagor, because there's a study. I don't know how often people have come across this in their fantasy football research, but there was a study done several years ago showing that the most unpredictable offenses, the more unpredictable an offense is, the more successful it is, keeping the talent fixed. They tend to score more points, and that's because the defense has to continually adjust, and they can't just fixate. And one of the properties of an even a balanced offense is that it's more unpredictable. And play-action passes just sort of inflates that unpredictability. So I expect an uptick in the production of both Sanders and Reagor. I think I'd be especially prone to rate Sanders higher this year. So for me, he's somebody you go out and get.
Balky, I'm just waiting for you to come with your follow-up question. You can't find one, can you? Can you find a follow-up question?
Listen, I will just say this because I know people are like, okay, that's interesting. This is good to know, but how do I apply this to drafts? Well, I'll tell you this. Miles Sanders right now, 301. Think about him going, and Biplab talked about this earlier. Guys like Nelson Sousa were drafting him super early. I know Tupac drafted him first overall of a Football Guys Players Championship draft last year. Now he's fallen to the 301. And Reagor, is just, and I know it's not like he didn't light the world on fire, but wide receiver 54 for a second-year receiver who was drafted in the first round last year, man, that seems like definitely a risk worth taking. And I would take him a lot higher than the 13th round, I'll tell you that right now.
Well, I think Sanders will outperform. I think he'll outperform what he did last year, but his draft position, the correct draft position for him, may not be as high as it was last year. I just think there's more confidence in taking him at the higher spot now.
HKR, I'm going to stay with you, and then we're going to go with Biplab because I want to ask you each the same question. But I want to preface that with the realization that FFPC Pros versus Joes may have awakened a monster and created an immovable force of fantasy football with you two teaming up. It's a scary prospect of to sit down at the table and compete against you guys individually, perhaps even more so as a team. So I'll be interested in the future of seeing what you do about that. But I would like to ask you, that we'd ask this of everybody that comes on the show, and you've already nailed a couple of them with talking about Corey Davis. But I don't know if I want to ask this question as what happened last year or what do you think is going to happen this year, because you're already doing your prep. But I guess we got to stick with last year. Who did you really, really hit home with that you knew was going to deliver for you significantly, and who did even you guys? And we can break out of your Pros versus Joes team and talk about your individual teams if you want. But who did you guys strike out on that you're willing, that you don't hold a grudge, and you're willing to come back and draft in 2021?
Well, I was very pleased with what I was able to get out of Antonio Gibson because I was able to pick him up pretty late. Early on in the season, and this is why I like drafting football guys, for example, in the first half of the season, he was available in the 9th and 10th round. And he produced extremely well at that point. I expect him to continue to ascend, and he's somebody I'm not going to be able to get that cheaply, obviously, this upcoming year, but he's somebody I expect to develop and possibly enter the realm of the studs this upcoming year. So he's somebody I'm going to keep going for. I was also very happy with Darren Waller. I like to take tight ends, elite tight ends, fairly early. I was burned in a few leagues by taking Ertz, for example, but I was more than happy to take Darren Waller a little bit later and obviously get a lot more production. And those teams were propelled into the money in a number of football leagues. I was quite lucky in that respect. But I had a number of duds too. Ezekiel Elliott. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, so this one really hurt. It was a very strange year for the Cowboys with obviously their quarterback being hurt and Elliott not playing up to snuff. Part of it was that the offensive line was constantly injured and there was lots of turnover. But Elliott didn't seem to play with the quickness and fire that I had seen in previous years.
How many times did you draft him? Did you have the third spot and he was your default player for the third position?
Almost always, yes. And that's what the source of the consternation was. You nailed it.
What about you, Biplab?
Yep. So for me, I think we talked a lot about Gibson, and that one we and both of us had very strong feelings about, going into drafts. And most of my teams, you would have found Gibson, if I were able to draft him. In fact, we were drafting Gibson over the starts like, Swift or Dobbins or some of those guys even, right? So we really had a strong feeling there. The other player for me was Deontay Johnson. Most of my teams last year would have had him as a player to the extent that I got scared once thinking 70-80% of my teams have him, and I started trading him in some dynasties just to diversify, right? So he was one, and I think he started rough, but he delivered towards the end. Two players who burnt me, and I'll try to stay away, are Odell Beckham and Keyshawn Vaughn. Kern and I were also very much into Keyshawn Vaughn at the start of last season, and that didn't work out. And Ronald Jones really surprised us, what he did, and someone I'll probably stay away from. My Vaughn fever is gone. But one player I'll tell you who broke my heart last year, and Farrell might know from my KFS KFFC teams, 90% of my teams there had Tony Pollard. And I still believe in Pollard. So he's someone I'll still go after this year. In fact, I was going to cry when I saw him finally start and Elliott was hurt. But Tony Pollard is someone I still believe in, and next year again someone I'll go after, even though he didn't do much this year.
And he
Kern,
plays
like
with what Hud is missing. He plays with that burst and that enthusiasm and that real energy on the field.
Kern, are you going to be a fan of drafting Tony Pollard in 2021, being the Cowboys fan that you are?
I'm rating him higher. I think he's going to have a bigger role next year. So I would. I'm not sure where I would take him yet, but I think if I got Zeke, I would be more consistent at making sure I get Pollard in the later rounds. Yep.
Yeah, Elliott is going obviously still in the first round, but right at the end of the first round instead of the beginning like he was last year. Tony Pollard, running back 38, going at the 9-10 turn right now. So that is what you have to invest in the Dallas running game, assuming that it does stay with those two players after the draft and free agency. All right, guys, we are running out of time here. I do want to get to one extra special email from a listener tonight. It's a guy that I know you guys are both buddies with, and I think this question is more directed to Kern, but I will read it to you. He writes, interested to get to the root of the successful strategy. Can you ask the professor if he has found his research and conclusions from promiscuous honeybee queens and the super sexy sperm hypothesis useful in developing his fantasy football strategy, and if he can share how it applies? Hope all is well. Signed, John Terry, former guest of this show, actually. Guy who's been on here several times. So, Kern, I don't know if you can enlighten us a little bit, and maybe I need to brush up on maybe I need to get in to take some of your classes at Cornell to sort of find out what I'm missing here. But perhaps you can shed some light on this a little bit.
Well, yes, it turns out that that honeybee queens mate with many, many different males, up to 30 or 40 different males. Okay, a single queen, and they use the sperm of all those males equally. And it's been a paradox in the study of social behavior why the queens would mate with so many males. And I won't go into the details of the sexy sperm hypothesis, but the idea is that you mate, if you're a queen, if you mate with many males, you're going to create a lot of different, genetically different workers and increase the chance that at least some of them will be resistant to any diseases that try to infiltrate the colony. So that it doesn't, one disease can't wipe out your entire worker force because they're all genetically the same. So it's a way to create genetic variety in the colony, which is beneficial to the colony because it's more likely to survive as a whole. By the way, that's the same reason that sex is, according to evolutionary biologists, evolved to create variety so that you can outwit, your offspring can survive, at least some of them, against the prevailing pathogens that they encounter in their lives. So it's a deep theory that probably would take about an hour lecture. but I'd like to say something about John Terry. So he's in the Dynasty 501 group, and this is one of the two major groups that I love because I see these. These two groups have group me's where we're constantly exchanging information about fantasy football, and I encourage everybody, especially if you're in a dynasty, get into a regular chat with your opponents and exchange information because it'll sharpen your fantasy football skills as much as anything that I've ever encountered. My other one are the 26ers. In the 250-26 Dynasty League, which have their own set of brilliant people. They're going to be a rising force in fantasy football. So I want to give a shout out to them. If you want to know how you really learn how to pick players, you use a deep learning mechanism called metalytics, which I'll leave as a mystery now. But it's more powerful than machine learning or deep computer learning. You'll have to find that out from the 26ers. So anyway, thank you, John, for your penetrating question, and I'll just have to leave my explanation at the level where I left it.
Well, and I'm thankful for the question, because I know when the three of us are all competing in Kentucky this coming year with at Farrell's event, I know at least one of my team names will be Sexy Sperm Hypothesis, no doubt. I don't know how I haven't used it yet already. Fellas, we're running out of time. Before we let you go, and I appreciate you guys being patient and hanging on a little bit tonight. It's been so much fun. Farrell does have one more question for you guys.
Oh, my goodness. I thought you might have answered this one already, but I'll give it to you, and I'll give it to you quickly. A couple of selections, guys, is what we're looking at. Guys that will be overdrafted, and you can't use anyone you've already said before. So guys that will be overdrafted, Balky's looking at all the early numbers, and guys that you think will slip that you want to get your hands on because of that slip.
Great question, Farrell. I'll go first. So from my standpoint, this will be an interesting year, I think, 2021, where you'll see a lot of running back and wide receiver depth in the middle round. So I'm probably not going to reach for a player like Jonathan Taylor at the ADP he's going. That scares me, because, Hines will still be around. So I'm not going to take him 5th or 6th overall. Build my team accordingly. And I'm not going to touch any receivers probably in early second or mid-second, because I do believe there will be a lot of value in later rounds. And one player I expect to fall is Courtland Sutton. I've always liked him, and he's coming out of injuries, and people will forget, but Judy has not impressed me, and I'm probably going to grab Courtland Sutton in later rounds, because I think he'll outplay his ADP.
Well, a couple of players that intrigue me, I think that are going to rise up the draft charts, are Chark and Chenault, with Trevor Lawrence throwing to them. I'm intrigued to see what's going to come of that. I'm not very excited about any New England running back. I'm really worried about what kind of decisions to make about them and how to value them. I'm talking about Sonny Michel, Damian Harris. I expected a lot more from this year. He didn't flash like I expected to in the opportunities he had. I don't know what's going to happen to James White. And that offense may struggle for a while. Depends on what kind of quarterback they get. I know Belichick is brilliant and will come up with some kind of new scheme, but I'm worried about all of them. And I have to say that Odell Beckham, his plight has made me wonder whether he's already peaked out and never to return to the heights that we saw him in a few years ago.
Balky, think about it. These guys are already at this point, and we're not even into Super Bowl week yet.
Well, this is part of the work ethic, the dedication, and the sheer natural talent of people who are able to win the 2020 FFPC Pros versus Joes. Kern has a ton of football guys, players, championship leagues that he won not only this year but several years. And Biplab, 8th overall in the FFPC main event this year. So no question, this is the type of analysis we expect. And by the way, my expectations were exceeded once again tonight from you guys. I can't thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for coming on tonight and sharing your analysis, not only going back to your draft in this past July in 2020, looking back on your Pros versus Joes draft, but giving us a lot to chew on, a lot to think about for the 2021 season. I can't wait to get it going again in Kentucky, get it going again in Vegas, and start competing with you guys, picking your brains, and seeing what happens in 2021. Thank you so much for coming on. Congratulations on the success, and good luck in 2021.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good night. Have a good weekend.
I'll be back in the chat room next week to drink from the fountain of knowledge. Thank you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, maybe we'll get some questions on the sexy sperm hypothesis. You never know what's going to come up there.
That's a deal.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Farrell, it was awesome tonight hanging out with Biplab, hanging out with Kern, and I'm glad we got some Senior Bowl analysis. And this was our official Shane Waldron introduction show. I know we'll have much more to say about him in the coming weeks as well. I want you to be good and enjoy your weekend, and we'll do this again next Friday, dude.
And I want to say one thing. We mentioned him a couple of weeks now. Lance Turbs. I miss him. Haven't spoken to him in about a year. But, Balky, the one thing I can say about him is that dude abides. And I will say good evening to you.
Yes, he does indeed abide. Thank you, Farrell Elliott. Check out Farrell at the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, KFFSC.com. Hopefully you can hop aboard and compete against myself and Kern and Bip this year. Always a great time in Louisville, always a great time in Cincinnati, always a great time online. All the different ways that you can compete in the KFFSC. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize that we could not get to any emails tonight. We just had the conversation flowing with Bip and Kern. We'll get to your emails next week, I promise you. I want to thank Biplab, Mandal, Hudson, Kern, Reeve, Farrell Elliott, the FFPC, Rob Bryce, and of course, each and every one of you. As Farrell pointed out, Lance Turbis will be on the High Stakes Lowdown this coming Thursday. We're recording the episode, I don't know, sometime next week, but it'll be out Thursday morning, rotoviz.com/podcast. Next Friday on these airwaves at 10/9 Central, the 2020 FFPC main event, 9th place finisher, Franco Vendomi, finished right behind Biplab Mandel in the main event this past year. He will be on the show next week. Register for those best balls, pick up those dynasty or your weekend starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com. It was broadcast live and heard around the world. Balky and Farrell will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
Thanks to Frederick the Younger as well, who did our outro music. All their music can be found at fredericktheyounger.com. Check out the Quiet Hollers at quiethollers.com. The intro music is who we thank for them, or is who we thank for that as well. Turbis on Thursday and then Domi on Friday. It may be the quote-unquote dead time of year. Maybe we'll get into some Senior Bowl stuff next week with Farrell. But there's plenty of draft action going on at myffpc.com. Hopefully you can apply this knowledge that you learned from Bip and Kern tonight into crushing a few drafts at myffpc.com. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.